Hello and welcome back to Perspectives. On today's show, we continue our examination of Canada's foreign interference report and how much India features in its findings. Meanwhile, the international Sikh community have been very active indeed over recent weeks, lobbying not only to highlight the issues affecting the community, but also establishing the legal foundations as the push for Khalistan is now gaining great momentum. We look at how the Sikh Federation has taken the vanguard, both here in the UK and across in the European Union. And finally, as Donald Trump makes his presence felt across the world stage, we take a look at the building trade war, and human rights has at last entered the game. All this and more on today's show. Well, joining me as always for Perspectives is our very own correspondent in Canada, James Cousineau. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Angus. It's a chilly morning here in Vancouver where we've got lots of snow coming down. So it's making things nice and bright out there. And we hope that between Angus and I, we can brighten your day. Thanks for joining us again on Perspectives.
We will certainly do our best. And James and I together will be bringing you our perspectives on the daily news affecting the Sikh community across the world. And we will, of course, as usual, be taking a look at loads of great comments at the end of the show. So stay tuned for that. Right, James, let's get things underway. What are you going to start us off with this morning?
Well, a lot of the news coming out on the foreign interference report has really scuttled around India's involvement, and a lot of the news agencies haven't gotten to delve right into the report. And I've been doing that for the last 5 days, just going through it. And guess what? Buried in the first part was, of course, dealing with transnational repression and India's involvement. Now, there is, again, we talked about this previously, that the focus of the report was on the political involvement, political interference, and such throughout Canada in the electoral system. But they did not leave out completely the foreign interference. And we're going to take a look at that, as well as other parts of the foreign interference report, the Commission's findings and recommendations throughout this week. So stay tuned all week as we delve into this. But tonight we're going to take a look at the transnational repression in the first section of the report and what was found and what is going on. And of course, we know that it's not just India that's playing that game. Other countries that were named specifically in the report, of course, was China and Iran, among others. Now, we know that China has been caught with illegal police stations in Canada to put pressure on their foreign nationals that are living here and Canadian citizens. Now, this is very much the same as what's happening with India in the fact that they are utilizing the pressures on Canadian citizens and those in Canada with permanent residency, and they basically make threats towards their families that are still living back in their own countries of origin. So this is very telling, because it shows that not only did they focus a small section of this report, but even further, the Commission found that they need to spend a lot more time to study the transnational repression that's happening within Canada's borders. And named specifically, as I said, India thought that they were able to skirt around the transnational repression part, but they did not. And as I've gone through the report, I have found a lot more information and such, as I said, that we'll delve into. Tomorrow on the show, we're going to actually look at them naming the Hardeep Singh Nijjar murder in the report specifically. But tonight we'll take a look at today we'll take a look generally at the report and the transnational repression that they called out as it's guided more towards India. So, of course, they went on to state that, again, it was not the main focus of this report. However, they should very much be aware that it's coming down with intimidation, harassment, and also threats coming from Iran, from the People's Republic of China, and of course, we know already India. And that is very specifically named within the report, and that they need to focus more on national security and ways of breaking down the transnational repression and foreign interference as a whole. And as we see here, that it clearly states that community organizations and private individuals are being the focus or targeted by the transnational repression activities. India's activities primarily target the approximately 800,000 members of the Sikh diaspora in Canada and aim to promote a pro-Indian anti-Khalistan narrative. This is nothing new to our audience or to you and I both, Angus. We know that this has been going on. The RCMP's statement in October of 2024 on violent criminal activity in Canada, including homicides, extortion, had connection to agents of the government of India, and it is consistent with the classified evidence. Further, national security and intelligence community assesses India as an emerging cyber threat actor, and that we've also been aware of with the use of bots, AI, and of course individuals. And as we've spoken before, Angus, there is hundreds of millions of dollars being spent by the India government on transnational repression activities that they are participating in countries around the globe. Now, in this image here, it just shows recruiting activity by the Canadian military and armed forces last summer. And of course, they are appealing to all different Canadians to get involved. And that, again, also helps with anti-terrorism, counter activities to transnational repression, as well as intelligence gathering on not only India, but other countries around the globe that are taking part in this activity on Canadian soil. Now, to look at the transnational repression action plan that they feel needs to be done, they are also aware and acknowledging that there is current activity going on and development of programs to counter the transnational repression. And that is not only by the RCMP, but also by CSIS, the Director and Deputy Minister of Public Safety. They are looking at all different areas to not only build in government processes, but working with the communities that are being impacted so that they can get a full scope or a full idea as to the ways in which they are being impacted. It's really easy for the government to assume and go by the information that's obtained through intelligence. But at the end of the day, of course, it is vital to get the feedback from those that are being impacted most by the transnational repression, by the foreign interference, the extortion, the threats, and all of the other activity that's going on. So, of course, there is interference in the diplomatic engagements with certain countries, including the PRC, and we know as well India. Canada's Canadian Heritage Digital Citizen Initiative has funded projects to understand the transnational repression in Canada. Again, it's referring to the PRC or People's Republic of China, but it also involves India, Iran, Russia, and China, and China again. Elections Canada has published voting guides that help with information to the different diasporas, with it published in 51 different languages to help expand awareness, education, and also processes in which people can report any concerns that they have. So again, there are all these different partners throughout the federal government that are looking into it, that have opened up processes, that are engaging, and also just really looking to curb this. As the report we touched on last week really shows that the cyber initiatives are probably the number one threat to Canadian process of elections, of the electoral district, and of a threat to Canadians. Now, this goes on to say that the RCMP witnesses that were responding were too diplomatic and distinguishable about how the RCMP responds to organized crime, and that includes those acting on behalf or behest of the India government and agents thereof. And we looked at the overview of the report last week, and we noticed that they didn't want to specifically call out in the overview India with the links to the government in the activities, including that of the assassination of Shahid Hardeep Singh Nijjar. But they went into it in further detail as you went through the report. Again, here we have just the different military gear that was out for display to the community. And again, the Canadian forces are looking to increase their presence not only in Canada but on foreign soil as well. And a part of that again is preparing people to go into everything from the front lines to communications. But let's not mistake that the cybersecurity, that foreign interference, all of these areas of new technology, including artificial intelligence, are becoming a very vital role and position within the military, not only in Canada, but in countries around the globe. We know that this report also, Angus, coming out to call out India specifically, really does show that they take it seriously, and that I think it's going to have a spillover effect in the United States, in the UK, Australia, and other nations where they are taking more steps to recognize what's going on, especially in light of the last 2 years in Canada. And what's been found in this report, I think, is going to be a big jumping stone for all of the other countries to say, we've got to take this seriously and we need to move forward with taking action. So I think that really jumps in, and they are naming India specifically, but they're also calling out specific instances and ways in which they are acting. Tomorrow on the show, we'll cover the isolated or specific instances that they looked at, including, as I said, the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, as well as other specific examples where they are definitively linking the India government, the India agents, and certain representatives of the India BJP, RSS, and of course the RAW agency. So we are seeing that the information is being dissected. We're taking a deep dive into it, Angus, and we're going to be reporting on all of the excitement that is India's, disinformation, misinformation, interference, and so forth. So we are getting excited to get to the truth, Angus.
Yeah, I think if you take a step back at this and look at it, look at the bigger picture, India has been named specifically in a report alongside Russia and China. And that very fact, I think we're almost losing sight of the fact that is so significant. This isn't France or Germany or Australia or Vietnam. India has specifically been named as one of 3 countries that essentially are acting as an enemy to Canada. That's the bottom line. It is interfering in Canadian politics with a malign intent, and that I think is in itself. We do get lost in the detail quite often, but it's only when you take a step back and say, hang on a second, does India realise just how significant this is? And of course, India publicly is up in arms saying, we deny everything and it's nonsense. But unfortunately, it's not nonsense, and this is all the resources of the Canadian government who've united to investigate this whole situation because they fear for their country's interests, they fear for their country's safety and those of its citizens. And India has been specifically named within that. So India, I think, the significance is just actually astounding that this nation is being essentially labelled as an enemy of Canada. And India clearly doesn't care about that. So that's one thing. The other thing is, you also then have to sort of say, well, look, okay, let's look at the bigger picture. Why? Why is India doing this? The cost of transnational repression is actually enormous. It is spending, there's a financial cost attached to this. And as we often say, James, that we know India are spending hundreds of millions of dollars every year on transnational repression, on its overseas activities to target and repress and oppress and persecute individuals living in foreign nations. That is a massive financial cost. Don't forget, this is a nation that has one of the greatest levels of poverty on the planet. It also, at the same time, has a space program. So the polarity in India's wealth is absolutely astounding. It's actually appalling that India not only has a space program, but it also boasts, if that's the right word, some of the worst poverty on the planet. And it also is allocating, as we say, nearly $500 million every year to transnational repression, to its overseas activity, to persecute those it perceives as enemies of the state. I mean, what is that in terms of justification of an allocation of assets, of allocation of your nation's wealth? Is it really justifiable to spend all that money of your nation's wealth on persecuting your political enemies? And the people of India need to ask themselves, is this really what you want for your nation? Do you really want your nation that is suffering so much poverty to spend nearly $500 million of the country's wealth, the country's bank accounts, on chasing the BJP's political enemies? Not your political enemies, the BJP's political enemies. That's what this is all about. And again, and we look at, okay, who is this targeted at? Why? Who is this transnational repression targeted at? It's generally the political enemies of the BJP. Read the RSS and read ultimately the upper caste Brahmins. So that is who this is targeted at. And of course, primarily, this is the Sikh diaspora. So the Indian government, the RSS, those who are controlling the Indian governance are spending all this money, focusing all these resources, massive amounts of resources, on the Sikh diaspora. And when we look at the numbers, the Sikh diaspora in Canada is just over 750,000. In the US, it's around about the same. Across the other nations, it's, I think in the UK, is it 500,000? The numbers actually are tiny. The population of India, it's 1.4 billion people. So again, this disproportionate targeting of massive amounts of India's wealth and resource is persecuting this tiny, tiny minority of people. And don't forget, the actual targets of transnational repression isn't the whole diaspora, it's just a tiny fraction of the diaspora. It is just those activists who are campaigning for Khalistan. So as I often say, James, and I come back to this, you look at that big picture, this massive, enormous resource being targeted at this tiny, minuscule number of people around the world. That is a massive compliment to the Sikh diaspora. It is a massive compliment to the Khalistan movement. It is a massive compliment to the power, the inherent power of the Sikh community. Because this is how much of a threat you are to this enormous, enormous machine of India. And to use a Christian analogy, it's the David and Goliath. David, this tiny young man, standing up to this enormous giant of Goliath and defeats, as it turns out, Goliath. And this is what the Sikh diaspora can take heart in. This is what the Sikh community can take a massive pat on the back for. You are fighting this massive machine of the Indian nation, this Indian government, this massive RSS machine which has existed for so long, that has controlled this enormous nation, this a nation that is a future superpower. They see you, your tiny presence, as a massive existential threat. That is what the Sikh nation is. That is what the Sikh community is. And that is how powerful you are. All the Sikh community needs to do, and it does it very well, and I'll talk about it to some degree in my stories, is that the Sikh nation needs to realise just how powerful you are. Realise this is in your remit. This is in your brief. This is in your control to take on the might of India. You will succeed. They know this. This is why they are allocating so much effort and resources and money to try and destroy the Sikh community, because they realise just how dangerous and powerful it is. Even though it's small in number, and this goes back historically, even back to the days of the empire, this is how powerful the Sikh nation, the Sikh people are. They are an existential threat to even greater, in terms of size, enemies like the Brahmins, like the Brahmanical control of India. They realise that Khalistan is on the cards, and again I'm going to talk about this shortly in my stories. They realise that the Khalistan movement is growing in momentum. They realise that the majority of the Sikh community is behind it. They realise that that message is so powerful it is now spreading outside the Sikh community, now that there are Western nations uniting and aligning behind this movement, because they realise actually what it does represent, it not just the democratic principles behind it, but also how strategically it could benefit the West and other nations around the world to have Khalistan established in the Indian subcontinent. So James, I think, as I say, we do tend to get lost in the detail. I think it's really important that we look at the detail of this because it does highlight just how bad India is and actually how deep these activities are going. But at the same time, let's run this in parallel with not losing sight of the big picture, is that India is not just running unaccountable to its own people. It is actually becoming its own worst enemy because it's highlighted to the rest of the world just how powerful the Khalistan movement is and just how important that Khalistan movement is for global geopolitics.
Absolutely, Angus. And, we'll be delving into this report further, but I think that this really shows that a lot of the media, especially the India media, has been pushing past all of these details and just going, cherry picking what they wanted to report on while overlooking this part of the report, which I think was very important for the Sikh community and to recognize India's involvement in this activity. So again, I think it'll bring us forward. As we look at the global stage and activities between one country and another, of course, we cannot overlook the impact and the introduction of the trade war that is not only hitting Canada, but also Mexico right now when it comes to the activities of the United States government and the Trump administration. Now, of course, we know that Trump has introduced general 25% tariffs across the board for all products coming out of Canada into the U.S., with the exception of oil and natural gas. That is getting tariffed at 10%. Now, there is the potential for increases to the tariffs because Canada is not sitting back and taking it lightly. Now, Trump has clearly stated that if Canada retaliates and introduces these retaliatory tariffs, then he would increase the U.S. tariffs even further. Add on top of that, he's also looking at more tariffs based on the finding of the trade reports and the import reports that he has asked his administration to take part in and to bring back to him next month. So again, we could see the tariffs going even higher. Now, the reality is that he is utilizing the excuse that it is to help curb the flow of fentanyl and illegal immigration across the Canada-U.S. border, when in fact last year, the U.S. Border Patrol caught a total of 20 kilos of fentanyl crossing the border. That represents less than 1% of all of it flowing into the U.S. And then when you look at the issue of illegal immigrants crossing the border into the U.S., that number is quite small in comparison to those who land via airplanes and are there on whether it's illegal documents or they're on the guise of visitor visas and so forth, or in comparison, of course, to the U.S. southern border. So again, the reality is that we do not have a whole lot that we can do to appease the Trump administration in Canada. And therefore, we look behind the tariffs and we look at what's going on. And we know that he, again, today brought up that he wants to pressure Canada financially into becoming a 51st state. Now, this started off as an offhanded joke at the dinner at Mar-a-Lago with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. And of course, we've seen where Trump floats ideas as jokes to start, and then they just continue on from there. Now, other people have looked at this as an opportunity or a tactic on behalf of the U.S. government to use it as leverage in negotiations. But I think that at this point, it's going to actually backfire on the U.S. because we are not only looking at the opportunity and growing demand that Canada now build a pipeline to the ocean because ours are generally going north-south to the U.S. market. Now Canadians are demanding that we move swiftly to build a pipeline that will take the oil to the shipping ports in British Columbia as well as on the East Coast to start selling our oil to the world and opening up world markets. Now, with those who don't understand how the oil works going from Canada to the US and why we sell it at a discount there, is quite simply that we are locked into the US market. We don't have the pipelines going to the shorelines and to the shipping areas in order to open up to international markets. Now, this is something that we had looked at as a nation several years ago, where these pipelines for the East-West were canceled. And again, it now is has a lot of Canadians second-guessing that decision and stating that we need to open up our supply and demand to the rest of the world, or at least our supply. With that said, of course, there is also the need to open up other markets for other goods, and whether that comes down to our food, to our corn, to our grains, whatever the case may be. Now, Canada is very much shifting their focus to build trade relationships with other nations outside of the U.S. So when this trade war does come to an end, it may actually harm the U.S. in the long term as well. But let's not forget that there's going to be a lot of pain felt in Canada. In the short term, we trade billions and billions of dollars worth of goods back and forth with the U.S. We are very closely tied in our economies. We are very closely tied in our culture and, many other aspects of everyday life. And that is going to make it very difficult on Canadian businesses and Canadians as a whole. Now, what's been stated by the Canadian government is to help a lot of businesses and a lot of individuals get through this, is that the Canadian government is actually willing and ready to bring in assistance to individuals and businesses at the levels they did during the pandemic, which is not a cheap move. It's not a long-term solution, but it definitely shows that Canada is ready to dig their heels in the long term. Now, of course, we also know that Marco Rubio showed up down in Venezuela and other parts on a tour that he's on right now, and there were riots and much upset in the bullying that everybody is feeling when it comes from the White House right now. And I think that even a lot of the Trump supporters are starting to feel that they have been disenfranchised, or that they have been they've been rooting for the wrong plan altogether. And I think there has to be some insistence to rein him in and get him refocused on taking the U.S. forward. Because let's face it, as a superpower, as a developed country, as one of the richest on the planet, they have the opportunity now to really move it forward. We've seen a huge impact on the foreign markets, whether it is the Toronto Stock Exchange, the NASDAQ, and others. You're seeing some impact there as well. And unfortunately, we've also seen over the last week where a lot of multimillionaires and billionaires in the U.S. are actually buying against the markets and going in on the shorts. So it's a difficult way to focus in on the true facts of what these tariffs, what this international pressure is all about, except for expansionism. We know that that is one of the key ideas of the U.S. right now, to expand their territories, and that is not definitely not going to work in Canada. For those who think that they can just come in and take over Canada, well, I think that they are really looking at it in simplistic terms and don't realize the challenges that would face, not only from Canada, but as a monarchy. It has much deeper roots and technicalities to just becoming a 51st state to the U.S. Now, of course, we know that there have been increases with China for 10% tariffs as well. And then, of course, the 25% that has been sanctioned against Mexico. And the nations are fighting back. Trump felt that he would just use the threat of further tariffs or increased tariffs if the countries retaliated. But let's face it, we look to be into a full-scale trade war with the U.S., and it's going to grow and expand worldwide. I don't think it's going to have the desired outcome, and I think that it is going to be a big mistake. Again, only time is going to tell, Angus, and we know that he's looking at putting tariffs on the UK and also the European Union. So we'll have to watch and see how it plays out and where the chips fall, I guess we could say.
Yeah, I'm chuckling because, we have differing views on Trump, but actually not so differing, I think, deep down, because this trade war and trade wars never go well. Trade wars are never a good thing, let's be honest. And Trump has launched, as just typical for Donald Trump, he's launched the mother of all trade wars. When Trump does something, he never does it in small measures. He always does it in a Trump style. And has he launched a trade war. These are massive tariffs he's imposed on various countries. And of course, so many people, so many commenters have just drawn in a massive breath and shaken their head and thought, oh no, here we go. Where is this going to lead? And of course, all the economists saying, well, you do realise this is going to bring in inflation, high levels of inflation in the US, as of course the tariffs to kick in, etc., etc. But again, I tend to sort of take a step back and say, okay, well, let's look at the bigger picture. Now, I myself, I have, I suppose, on balance, been a general supporter of Trump. Even I've sort of taken a huge inward breath and thought, okay, I hope you know what you're doing, Mr. Trump. But actually, and I suppose on the face of it, if you look very simplistically, trade wars are never good. But the reality is, Trump always has a result in mind. He always has a goal in mind. And when his strategy is always pretty much the same. He understands what is his goal, and then he thinks, okay, what is the most outrageous and fastest way to reach that goal? And this is why these outrageous gestures always come in. And we talk about this, I'm going to make Canada the 51st state. I'm going to basically take over Greenland. Of course, these are absolutely outrageous statements, and it has the desired impact because the world just rushes around in an absolute tizzy saying, how dare you can't say that? But all the while, Trump's quietly chuckling away because he knows how it goes every time. And every time people then say, okay, and this is, again, a very typical negotiating tactic that all the best negotiators do. They always come out with the most outrageous demand to start with because they know that immediately puts your opponent on the back foot. And they then see subsequently their movement, when they actually end up somewhere in the middle, they actually end up moving in a much worse position than otherwise they would have done because anything is better than this outrageous demand. So I think this is just classic Trumpism. He's made this first outrageous move. These tariffs are absolutely outrageous because, frankly, the likes of Canada and China and Mexico and all these other nations, basically anything that they settle on after that is a better result, and they will sigh a huge sigh of relief. But ultimately, the end product is actually better than otherwise would have been achieved had he just done a normal negotiating strategy like any other president, should we say. So I think there's a lot of this behind Trump. This is how he does it. And this is actually how I think he achieves great results. So all that aside, it is worrying. And as I say, this is going to be a very, very interesting test because it's actually never been done before. The only comparison, I think, is back in, strangely enough and worrying enough, before the Great Depression in the 1930s, when again a massive trade war was implemented, and again it partly led on to the Depression. It didn't cause the Depression, but it was one of the contributing factors towards it. Let's say it exacerbated it. So one wonders then, what is this going to achieve? But the fact that the scale it's being done is so enormous, so almost unprecedented, that actually nobody really knows what this is going to achieve. And it's very easy for his critics, as have been lining up in the world media, who have traditionally been anti-Trump anyway. So, they would say this, of course. And they're all been lining up saying, this is a disaster, this is going to cause everything up to World War III, etc. But nobody really knows what's going to happen. This is almost an interesting test. Okay, we've never tried this before. Let's try it. Because frankly, we've tried everything else before and it doesn't always work. On most cases, it doesn't seem to work. And this is why I personally am always a big fan of outrageous moves, because, well, let's try something different. Again, it's the old definition of madness. If you keep trying the same thing, expecting a different result each time, that is the definition of madness. Well, let's try something outrageously different that we've not tried before. And this is what Trump is an absolute triumphant at. He always is never afraid of trying something outrageously different just to see if it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. If it does, wow, we've just achieved something new. So I think this is going to be an interesting times. And as he says, the only way you can change behaviour is you've got to punish or at least incentivise or whatever. And the only way he is going to change the behaviour of the likes of China or even Canada to some degree is by imposing such things like this. Now, all that aside, I think one of the interesting things that came out over the weekend was, and I talked about human rights in the introduction, all the stuff that we talked about Canada and Mexico, etc. Yeah, there is this agenda about he's trying to reduce the inflow of fentanyl, the immigrants, etc., etc. Now, he, over the weekend, has talked about imposing sanctions on South Africa. Now, trade with South Africa is not enormous. It certainly doesn't benefit the US in any great way. It obviously benefits South Africa a lot more. But the key here, and what's different about South Africa, is his immediate highlight, the headline of why he's planning on imposing sanctions on South Africa is human rights. Now, it's not about, he hasn't done this with Canada, about Mexico. That's all been about something that directly benefits the US, fentanyl, immigrants, whatever. But South Africa, human rights in South Africa doesn't directly affect the US, yet he is threatening to impose sanctions on South Africa for their human rights record. It's about things like the compulsory appropriation of land, particularly from the whites. This has happened, of course, north of the border in Zimbabwe to a great extent, but it's also happening now in South Africa. So he's highlighted this human rights element, and I think this is an interesting deviation from the, shall we say, the traditional economic benefits that he's after. This is specifically about human rights. Now, I am sure there's probably a subtext here. I'm sure there's a hidden agenda there that also does directly benefit the United States. Trump doesn't do anything without directly benefiting his own interests and the US's interests. So, yeah, there probably is a subtext here. But the headline here is human rights. This is relevant because, of course, James, when we talk about India and his relationship with India, the economics are massive. There's a lot at stake here, particularly for India, but to some degree, the US as well. India is a future superpower. The US wants India on side, particularly when it comes to tackle China. Of course, all those geopolitical strategic benefits, why India should be a friend of the United States and the West. We've talked about that a lot. So I think human rights are going to start entering the game here. I think the human rights might, well, we said this before, and I have predicted this before, but I am sure now that when Trump sits down with Narendra Modi as these discussions unfold, I am sure that human rights are definitely going to be on the agenda. And of course, those human rights particularly relate to the minorities and of course the Sikh community, as well as the other minorities, the Muslims, Christians, etc. But I think now, James, notwithstanding all that's happening with Mexico and Canada, I think what's happening now over the weekend with South Africa is an indicator, is a symptom of something that I think is going to unfold with the negotiations with India. And I think this is what's going to have a direct impact with the Sikh diaspora. Human rights, I think, James, have entered the game.
Yeah, and that's where I think we differ on that opinion, in the fact that I think it's more that he is looking at South Africa's involvement in the BRICS system and his, of course, being against that, but also looking at every opportunity in which to raise tariffs or to introduce tariffs in order to bring forward and realize his tax cuts and and to fund his tax breaks for the rich in the U.S. at the cost of the U.S. consumer and pushing inflation up. But again, that's just my opinion on it, and we'll have to really wait and see how it plays out. I don't believe that that the true reasoning behind it is human rights, when he is in breach and ignoring certain sections of his own constitution and the rights of, foreign-born or, citizens born in the U.S. that may have illegal parents and such. So again, we differ on that, but I think that that's what brings perspectives all together, is because we share our perspectives. Sometimes they vary, sometimes they're in line, but again, we bring that thoughtful and respectful conversation about it, Angus.
Absolutely, James. It would not do if we agreed on everything. This is, as you say, there's no point if we agreed on everything. We absolutely need to provide those differing views, to provide perspectives so people can make up their own mind. Indeed, James.
That's right.
Okay, right. Let's move on now, because time has marched on. Let's move on to my first story, and this story. So my next two stories actually really deliberately focusing on the massive power of lobbying, the massive power of the Sikh diaspora and what it's been up to over really actually just even recent months. Now, of course, lobbying has formed a very large part. Activism has been a big part of the Sikh community for so long. It's ingrained in the Sikh psyche to be active, to be heavily campaigning against injustice, etc., etc. But this has really stepped up a gear, and the impact now is actually becoming increasingly visible. And my story today is about the Sikh Federation, particularly. He's really taken the vanguard, particularly from here in the UK, but is now spreading across the diaspora as they have united the Sikh voices behind the Sikh Federation International, which we've talked about a lot. And so I want to cover the ground that's been gained over recent weeks even here in the UK, which is now starting to spread out a little bit more widely across the globe. And it's also highlighting just how clever the campaigning is now become, how much more focused. This isn't just scattergun activism, just blasting off in every direction, hoping something's going to stick somewhere. This is now turning into a bit more of a sniper rifle. This is much more targeted, much more focused, much more clever, intelligent campaigning to have a much more significant impact, to actually move things forward, to actually achieve goals. And this is what this is about. So here in the UK, the Sikh Federation launched a petition back in December. I think it was December the 16th. They launched this petition to secure the release and return of British nationals arbitrarily detained in India. Of course, we're talking about Jagtar Singh Johal in principle, but of course there are many other political detainees in India that we have talked about. And this petition was launched just a few weeks ago, and it's highlighted as saying there are British nationals being arbitrarily detained without conviction in Indian jails for many years, with many concerns about their treatment. Of course, we do know that they have been tortured for a fact. So this petition is to petition the UK government to secure the release of all British nationals that are arbitrarily detained and return them to the UK. And there are others actually across, I think in Iran and other nations, and Egypt, we do have British citizens detained arbitrarily. But Jagtar Singh Johal is the one particularly of relevance to our community. So it calls for the release and return of the UK to the UK of the British nationals detained in Indian jails, especially where there are human rights concerned. Now, this petition was launched. It's got 4,000 signatures so far. If you are in the UK and you're a UK citizen, please do sign this petition. Please do lend your support. It's really important. This petition is highlighted and goes wide. The petition website is very good, actually. It has a map, and it always makes interesting reading and interesting viewing to see where the signatures come from around the UK. And it's actually a very good geographical spread. Unsurprisingly, it's the Sikh diaspora regions that obviously feature heavy. The dark red colours are where most signatures have come from. They, of course, do reflect the areas with the highest Sikh population in the UK, around west of London, in the Midlands, particularly Birmingham, Leicester, those sorts of areas. But I do find it, in Scotland, Glasgow likewise has quite a good Sikh population as well. But I'm still astonished, and this really makes me laugh, I don't know why. But even up in the Outer Hebrides and the Orkneys, these are the far-flung northern islands out in the peripheries of the United Kingdom. Even they have achieved signatures, so well done. I don't know if there are any viewers in the Hebrides or the Orkneys to our show, but if you are, please make a comment, let us know that you exist. It'd be fantastic to know that we do reach these far-flung islands. And I've been to the Hebrides and the Orkneys on several occasions. Beautiful, fabulous places. But let us know if you're out there. So anyway, back on track. Now, the Sikh Federation have been very, very clever about this, and I'll explain this. This petition website, if you gain 100,000 signatures, it then obliges the British Parliament to debate that petition, to debate that subject. It doesn't always achieve anything, but what it does, it tends to highlight the fact that there are enough people in this country that care about it, and therefore there has to be a debate. It's a slightly cynical ploy by the government, because ultimately it can allocate debating time, but doesn't actually have to agree to anything. So sometimes, and there have been debates recently about all sorts of things. One of which was, in fact, 3 million signatures demanding that Keir Starmer resign. There's another general election, which, of course, had to be debated. It was debated, but unsurprisingly, it was rejected out of hand. But it's unlikely this petition will reach 100,000 signatures, and the Sikh Federation know this. And even if it did, even if it was debated in Parliament, it's going to achieve nothing. So they've been actually very clever about this. What the Sikh Federation have done, they said, OK, every constituency that achieves 100 signatures, they are demanding that MP writes a letter to Keir Starmer, to the Prime Minister, and David Lammy, our Foreign Secretary, so that this MP writes those two to say, look, you must take action about this. Now, this is very clever. Why? Because this isn't just grassroots all writing individual letters to their MPs saying, look, you've got to do something about this. These are MPs, and there are only a few hundred MPs in the UK, and only a few hundred MPs in the Labour Party government, in the Labour government. But if the more Labour MPs that write to their boss, the Prime Minister, that Prime Minister is actually going to take more notice of this. Receiving a few thousand individual letters, he's just going to ignore. But getting letters from an MP is important, it's significant, because he needs those MPs to support him. Otherwise, he's going to be out of a job. If these MPs feel a bit aggrieved that their boss isn't listening to them, they're going to start being a little bit more difficult to deal with. But Starmer needs these MPs on side. So in other words, their voice carries enormous amount of weight, a disproportionate amount of weight. So what the Sikh Federation are doing, they're getting each of these MPs on side. They are ensuring that these MPs write to Starmer, because those letters, each single one of those letters carries a massive amount of weight. But each letter essentially might only have 100 Sikh signatures behind it. So rather than 100,000, we only need 100 signatures in each constituency to prompt an MP to write a letter. Very, very clever, this. So for example, and this has happened in a few, I think it's about 10 or 12 constituencies now have over 100 signatures. So every time this has happened, the Sikh Federation has written to that MP this letter. And for example, it says, look, your support, refers to your support in the campaign to secure the release of Jagtar Singh Johal. And the letter says that Starmer and Lammy in opposition put pressure on the Conservative government to secure the release of Jagtar Singh Johal. But since then, nothing's happened. We need you, essentially I'm paraphrasing what this letter says. It says, look, we need you to pressure your boss, to pressure Prime Minister Keir Starmer about something that you promised. Your constituents elected you in that last election because your party promised to release Jagtar Singh Johal, amongst other issues, which I'll come on to. So, therefore, we're now calling that in. We elected you, you made these promises, so you need to deliver on those promises. So write to your boss, Mr. Starmer, and demand, where is this action? Why are you not taking action about Jagtar Singh Johal? So, well done to the Sikh Federation for doing that. And I'm delighted to say it is having an impact. For example, Dr. Lauren Sullivan, she's the Labour MP for Gravesham. This constituency received over 100 signatures. Lauren Sullivan received such a letter from the Sikh Federation, and as a result, Dr. Lauren Sullivan MP wrote to David Lammy, Foreign Secretary, and wrote a letter saying, I'm writing to you concerning the case of Jagtar Singh Johal, and expressing her concern that, look, as you'll be aware, he's been subject to torture and mistreatment. He is a British citizen. We must do everything in our power as a government to apply continued and heightened pressure on the Indian authorities to ensure his immediate release. This should include both public and private diplomatic engagements, etc., etc. So again, a powerful letter. David Lammy can't ignore this. He can ignore lots and lots of individual letters from all around the UK. He cannot ignore a letter from one of his fellow MPs. So really, really powerful. This is the impact. And as a result, Dr. Lauren Sullivan has also written back to the Sikh Federation saying, thank you for writing to me. I enclose a copy of my letter. This has had an impact. I appreciate everything you're doing, etc., etc. So well done to that MP. Now, there are other MPs who have received over 100 signatures on the petition, who have received this letter from the Sikh Federation. They include one of our most high-profile Sikh MPs, Tam Desai, but it also includes Matt Weston, Gurinder Singh Josan, Deirdre Costigan and Joy Morrissey, who've all had over 100 signatures from their constituents. They have received these letters. So the Sikh Federation then have applied this pressure right across the board, and they are calling now for more and more people around the UK. So if you're in the UK, please, please, please sign this petition, because this is pushing this pressure upward to your individual MPs. It's so simple. It only takes 100 signatures. That's not a lot. So talk to your friends, talk to your community, get people, just please sign this petition, because every 100 signatures in a constituency is another one of these massively powerful letters. And it doesn't take many of these letters to have to push Starmer to take action. Now, the Sikh Federation at the same time have also written letters to all 400 Labour MPs about the four key issues, the four main issues that affect the Sikh community at the moment. They, of course, are this promised inquiry into 1984, the British government's involvement, Thatcher's government's involvement in the attack on the Ahmadiyya Sahib. That was promised to have, Keir Starmer himself personally promised to launch a public inquiry. So far, nothing. So that's one issue that is right that the Sikh Federation have written to all 400 Labour MPs. Look, you promised this. This is why we elected you. Where is it? Secondly, the UK government needs to join the Five Eyes nations and call out transnational oppression. You're not vocal enough about it. Why are you not vocal enough about it? Thirdly, of course, Jagtar Singh Johal, which we talked about. And fourthly, end the inappropriate use of Schedule 7 of the Terrorism Act 2000 to target Sikh activists. Watch my interviews with Deepa Singh for more information about that. Basically, this is where the Anti-Terrorism Act is being used and abused disproportionately against members of the Sikh community. So do watch my interviews of Deepa Singh if you want to know more about that. They say the number of Labour MPs, including ministers, have responded positively. Meetings have been organised and letters like the following, which I'll show you, have been sent to the government. So, for example, Dr. Lauren Sullivan, again, who also wrote that letter specifically about Jagtar Singh Johal, also wrote to David Lammy, Foreign Secretary, about all those four main issues, the inquiry into 1984, Jaggi, etc., etc. So again, this is something that David Lammy cannot ignore. So again, the more MPs that write these letters to David Lammy and Keir Starmer, the more likely it is that these issues are going to be addressed. So, again, the Sikh Federation reported only yesterday that the 8th and 9th MP to get over 100 signatures from constituents on the petition have now responded, and they have now sent letters to David Lammy. So, in other words, it's having a big impact. And this, again, is just highlighting the fact how successful that and how targeted now that the campaigning, the activism coming from the Sikh diaspora in the UK is having. It's actually, again, as I said at the beginning, this is very, very clever activism. This is very, very targeted activism. It's now saying, look, enough of this just general scattergun approach. We need to be more focused. We need to be more clever about this. And this is exactly what's happening. This is very, very specific campaign now, targeting individual MPs to in turn get them to specifically target Starmer and David Lammy. And this is working, it's really working. So I think this is going to have a massive impact. Back to Jagtar Singh Johal. Jaggi's own local MP, he's now a Labour MP, he succeeded the SNP MP, Douglas McAllister. He has been obviously lobbied very heavily by Jaggi's family and his brother Gurpreet, who I interviewed a couple of months ago. They have got him on side. He has actually spoken now again recently in Parliament. Let me quickly play you this.
It's appreciated that a new trade deal with India could support jobs and prosperity in the UK and thus drive growth. Can I ask the Minister to include in the work underway across government to prepare for negotiations with India that those discussions include the immediate release of my Western Bartonshire constituent Jagtar Singh Johal from arbitrary detention in India prior to concluding any trade deal?
Minister.
I recognise this is a very significant issue for my honourable friend. We remain absolutely committed to encouraging the Government of India to see faster progress to resolve this case. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, raised this case with Prime Minister Modi back on the 18th of November. We've made clear the need for faster progress towards a resolution on this issue.
Yeah, blah, blah, blah. I mean, there's no point even listening to the answer. It's just more words. As we keep saying, we'll judge you on results. And so far, the results, we're waiting for any results. But anyway, the point is that now, once again, the whole story of Jaggi, all these Sikh issues are really, really becoming more and more public, high profile. They're being discussed in Parliament on a regular basis now. How many videos have I now shown of MPs, individual MPs standing up, holding the government, Keir Starmer's government, to account, saying, "What are you doing about Jaggi? What are you doing about these Sikh issues?" Again, we keep getting non-answers, but the pressure is there. So this is, James, is just a highlight. This is activism. This is targeted activism, particularly stemming from the Sikh Federation UK. So well done to them. This highlights just how grassroots activism can have an impact if it's well designed, if it's intelligent activism. This isn't just about getting out into the streets waving the Khalistan flags, which does have a place, so the diaspora must keep doing that. But this is how the political leadership within the Sikh diaspora can have a massive impact if it's cleverly targeted. If you use the system to your benefit, and this is what's happening here in the UK, they're using the democratic process to target MPs, individual MPs, to get the individual MPs to unite, to provide that powerful political voice, to then lobby those who can make a difference, which of course is the government of the time. So James, I think this is a really, really positive sign that things are moving forward. And of course, these are building the stepping stones towards Khalistan.
Absolutely, Angus. And of course, it takes time to find a diplomatic solution. But it just amazes me that one hasn't been resolved and Jaggi hasn't been returned home yet. I mean, it just amazes me that it's dragged on for as long as it has. And let's face it, I mean, every bit of pressure on the British Parliament is essential to make sure that he's not forgotten, but more important, to make sure that the MPs and the leadership are held to account. Why hasn't he been brought home? Why hasn't there been a much more priority placed on securing this British citizen to get him back from an arbitrary detention in a foreign land? And, I would take it even further and say that if you are in the UK, not only go online and do it, but also send a traditional written letter, even if it's printed out from the computer, but send it in the postal service, because that is hard to ignore when they start to get these piles of mail building up, because they're not used to that anymore. It really shows that you are committed to this cause and to get Jaggi home. For those in Canada and the US, I would encourage you to send emails to the British Parliament anyway and tell them that if they want tourism dollars, that is being looked at and considered by people around the world if they are not willing to stand up for their own citizens and protect them. What makes us think that they have the ability to protect foreign citizens who are spending tourism dollars in their country? Just
Absolutely.
a thought.
Absolutely right, James. Our MPs in all our countries need to be reminded on almost daily basis who they represent. They're not there for fun or whatever, or to line their own pockets. They are there to represent their constituents. And that is why that the diaspora, the community, needs to remain active. Keep targeting your MPs. They're the people who can actually make a real difference. So, talking of which, let's move on quickly because we're already running out of time. The activism here in the UK from the Sikh Federation hasn't just stayed in the UK. Of course, I mentioned the building blocks, the stepping stones to Khalistan. Of course, a legal foundation needs to be built if Khalistan and when Khalistan is going to happen. But of course, one of those building blocks is to highlight the fact of what India has been up to. It's got to highlight the fact that, look, first of all, you've got to set out your stall to justify why Khalistan should be established and who it will represent and the principles for which it will stand for. At the same time, you've also got to explain, look, why it's needed, because of course the persecution coming from India. You've got to highlight the fact of what India has been up to and proving it legally to the right people. And of course, by that you're looking at the international organisations, the likes of the United Nations, which of course we talked about at length. Now, one of those other organisations, let's call it, that needs to be persuaded and educated about what India has been up to is, of course, again, one of the larger let's say federations on the planet, that is the European Union. And of course the Sikh Federation International and of course I would say probably pushed by the Sikh Federation UK have been actually lobbying the European Union. They've got into the European Union to again highlight the fact that, look, the European Union and the UK contains a very large Sikh diaspora. There's a large Sikh community within the European Union, and it's important that you understand what that community is about, what it represents. So very deliberately, the Sikhs have taken up these issues with the European Commission and actually inside the European Parliament itself. And last week, the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said in Davos that she would be going to India for her first trip of the new term. So this is why it's particularly relevant. So it provided a really important opportunity for the Sikh community to write to the vice presidents in the Commission responsible for human rights, the fundamental rights and rule of law, and to highlight to them, look, you do realise as you go and have your conversations, presumably about trade and other things, with India, you need to be aware of what's going on. And of course, what's going on is transnational repression and this persecution of their political opponents and the oppression of their minorities within India. And of course, we reported recently how the United Nations were again lobbied by, very specifically and very deliberately and very cleverly by the Sikh community to set up their special investigation. They appointed these UN special rapporteurs to investigate India. They've written this 16-page letter, a very damning letter about India's misbehaviour, to put it mildly. So again, how they've used their lobbying powers to highlight India's misbehaviour, and how India's behaviour is actually directly impacting upon the Sikhs across not just the world, but specifically in different European Union countries. And importantly, this has not been highlighted in the media. It's been weirdly ignored by the media across the European Union, probably because people just aren't aware of it. It's so low profile. So all this, again, is about raising the profile of the Sikh community, what matters and why Khalistan, again, is important. So, and of course, this lobbying has brought to the attention of the European Union. Look, you wrote this letter, but if you realise what India has responded, they've responded absolutely outrageously. They've called the United Nations rapporteurs as being biased, as being prejudiced, as being having an anti-India agenda, basically calling into question the integrity of the United Nations, which again, it's, as we said before, James, it's the fastest way to undermine your credibility is to accuse your accusers of being idiots, basically, and that is what India has done. So again, it's bringing to the attention of the European Union. Look, you do realise what's going on here. India's accused the UN of these outrageous prejudices, etc. So these are the people that you're dealing with. And this week, a delegation of Sikhs from Austria, Belgium, France, Netherlands, Italy, Norway, Portugal, Spain and the UK were in attendance at a meeting in Brussels. And they after this meeting, they held a press conference in front of the world press, certainly the European press, but certainly the global press as well, of which the Vice President Antonella Sberna for human rights in the European Union, she addressed the press conference. She was, of course, in that meeting, and also that same press conference, I think Dibinjit Singh also addressed the press conference. Again, this is in front of the whole European media. All these issues were brought out publicly, and so Dibinjit Singh and the others of that commission stood alongside Vice President Antonella Sberna. So again, it shows unity that the European Union is standing alongside the Sikh community, addressing the world press, and again, it's sending a message to India. Now, just to quickly highlight what was in the agenda, what was discussed in this European Union meeting. It included a historical context on human rights from a Sikh perspective. So again, educating those in attendance from the European Union. Look, this is the history of Sikh oppression. It goes back all the long way back, essentially to the Sikh Empire, but certainly since 1947. This is the context. In other words, we're not making this up. This is what's happened since 1947 and the dreadful genocides that have occurred since then. So again, it's setting out a very, very powerful context of why the European Union must take this very seriously. It addresses issues in the EU, including freedom of religion for the Sikh minority, and challenges that are being experienced on a daily basis to the Sikh identity. It then raised the issues in India, the freedom of practicing religion, of course the political prisoners, Jaggi amongst many others, the 30th anniversary of the killing of human rights defender Jaswant Singh Kalra, who we've talked about at great length, and then of course issues across the globe, the anti-Sikh hate crimes that happened since 9/11, and of course the big subject, transnational repression, that isn't just occurring in North America and the UK, but it is actually happening across the European Union as well, etc., etc. So a lot of small things planned of that. There is actually another major event planned in a couple of months' time that will focus particularly on items 4 and 5. Of course, those are very big items there. So more to report on this over the next coming months. But James, very important. This is part of this massive momentum now building. We've talked about how the Sikh Federation International has addressed the United Nations very powerfully. It is now addressing the European Union. These are the building blocks. So the United Sikh Voice is now getting in front of all the globe's important organisations, these legal entities that are needed to align to come on side to the Khalistan movement. First of all, they need to understand what is it about. And once they can understand, once they can be persuaded why Khalistan is necessary, why it is strategically beneficial for all these organisations, then they will align. They will throw their support behind this. They're now being persuaded about India's persecution, their human rights records. So again, it helps persuade the UN, the EU, all these international bodies to align with the pro-Khalistan movement. They will understand why it is so important, what benefits it will bring, and therefore they will support it. That's what's happening, Jays. It is unfolding before our very eyes.
Absolutely. And let's not, overlook this and how serious it is in terms of the Sikh Federation International becoming a very credible and legitimate organization within the eyes of international leaders, that they are taking this seriously. And that really shows the distance that the Khalistan movement has come since, even the last 5-10 years, that it has really, really built up a momentum and credibility from the international political stage, Angus.
Indeed. So, lots happening. So we'll keep an eye on this. But as I say, this momentum is building. There's big momentum. There's a lot of intelligent thought gone on behind this current movement now. They realise the militancies of the 80s and 90s was a hiding to nothing. It was going nowhere. This is what's going to bring Khalistan. It's a legal, democratic, very intelligent forward move that's now taking shape. And it's this is why Khalistan is going to happen in the foreseeable future. So, James, we are way over time as usual. Let's move on. And unfortunately, we're going to have to whip through our comments today. Loads of great comments. Thank you to all of you who have commented. But unfortunately, again, because we're out of time, we're going to have to rush through these. Danny 500K8. This is a really good comment. This is an interesting comment. Watch my podcast from last week. I have to say, it was the most mind-blowing podcast I've ever done. Bhajan Singh Binder talked about the most incredible story. And unfortunately, again, we don't have time just to relate what went on and the significance. But basically, the Sikh community back in the 1940s actually prevented the most incredible movement, geopolitical movements. The Soviet Union was potentially, in the 1970s, 1979, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. It was potentially moving into Pakistan to link up the Soviet Union, to extend the Soviet Union all the way to the Indian Ocean. India was deeply aligned with the Soviet Union. Indira Gandhi was a friend of the Soviet Union, of Moscow. As a teenager, Indira Gandhi used to spend time in Moscow being feted by the KGB and the Russian government at the time, the Soviet government. That's how close India was. And they were helping the Soviet Union move towards India itself through Afghanistan, Pakistan. Essentially, Soviet Union wanted access to the Indian Ocean for obvious reasons. And the only thing standing in its way was Pakistan. And the only thing standing really in its way was the Punjab. The Sikh community prevented this by its very existence, by its very militancy. This is what stopped the Soviet Union from expanding literally all the way across into India. This is what stopped India being absorbed by the Soviet Union. India needs to understand the debt of honour that they owe the Sikh community back in those days. Throughout the 70s and 80s when this was unfolding, it's absolutely astonishing. The evidence is now coming to light of really the agenda that was going on behind the scenes. The only thing that stopped it were the bullets of Beyant Singh and his colleague. When they assassinated Indira Gandhi, they stopped this incredible plan from unfolding. It's an Operation Shanti. Do watch the podcast. Please understand, because I don't think many people who even watch that podcast really understand the massive implications of this and what actually the Sikh community and Beyant Singh and his colleagues stopped in 1984. It just blew my mind. But anyway, unfortunately, we don't have time to elaborate on that. But as a result, Danny says, look, Indira Gandhi was a despot. Yeah, she was, and we talked about it at great length. Her father, Nehru, gave away 49% of Kashmir to Pakistan on a golden platter. Yes, he did. He and Jinnah had Sikhs kettled into Lahore in 1947. Now, Jinnah, he's a key character in Partition 1947. Muhammad Ali Jinnah, this guy, he was a lawyer, he was a barrister, educated in Britain, but he became this massive figure in Pakistan. He became the first leader of Pakistan. He was responsible for, he was the founding father of Pakistan. He conspired. He used to be with the Congress Party. This is what people forget. He was a member of the Indian Congress Party. This is why he was so close to Indira Gandhi. And Jinnah worked with the Congress Party to partition, to break away Pakistan. So your comment, Danny, Sikhs got duped. Absolutely they did. Now in the old days, Ranjit Singh's land was 100% Sikhs. Of course it was. It was their empire. The question you raise, good question. How did Jinnah end up with 65% of that title? Well, I've just explained it. That's how. Because Jinnah was in bed with the Congress Party. He was in bed with Gandhi and the Hindus and the Brahmanical controllers. That's how they did a deal behind the scenes where clearly the agenda was very clear. Look, we'll give you Pakistan. We'll break up the Punjab. You can have that bit. We'll take the rest of it. Yeah, we'll pretend to the Sikhs that, we'll give you whatever we promise. But as soon as partition happened, Jinnah walks away with Pakistan, thank you very much. The Brahmins walk away with India, including half of Punjab, thank you very much. And what do the Sikhs end up with? As you rightly say, absolutely betrayed to the core. If that hopefully answers your question. It is. This is part of the betrayal, and we often ignore the Pakistan side of this discussion of what Jinnah did. Yeah, Jinnah did what was best for the Muslims at the time. Well done to him. You can't blame him for that. But at the same time, he conjoined with the Brahmins to betray the Sikhs. That's essentially what happened, and unfortunately, the Sikhs lost out on that. So we don't have much more time to discuss that comment, James. Have you got any comments on that? It's a fascinating story, though.
It certainly is, Angus, and I think that I'll bypass commenting on it. I had a few thoughts, but we are running very behind today.
I mean, I could, unfortunately, we could do a whole show on the subject, and I wish, Danny, we could talk more about your comment. You're absolutely right. Where to begin? As I say, it's just, there's so much to talk about that. Tajinder Singh says, thank you, Bhajan Singh Ji, for uncovering the malicious mindset. Absolutely. Partly it's happening because Sikhs are bestowed with responsibility by Guru. Raj Karega Khalsa are failing to put their act together. Well, what does Raj Karega Khalsa mean? It's a Sikh slogan that represents this idea of sovereignty. It's said at the end of the daily prayer or the Ardas, and what it is part of the bigger phrase, and I'm going to have to read this. The full phrase is Raj Karega Khalsa Aki Rahe Nakoi. Pardon my pronunciation. And that translates as the pure will rule and the sinner will be vanquished. Absolutely. Well, all I would say, look, you're saying they're failing to put their act together. Well, refer to what I've said earlier and my stories today. I think they are now finally getting the act together. The Khalistan movement is getting its act together, James. I think, don't worry, have faith to the Sikh community. Keep the activism going, keep the campaigning going. As we're reporting now on a regular basis, it's very clever now. The Khalistan movement is doing it the right way. This is why I think it's going to happen in the foreseeable future, James.
Absolutely, Angus. And let's not forget that the next referendum is coming up in Los Angeles in March. So if you are in that region and interested, I'm sure that Sikhs for Justice could use more volunteers.
Absolutely. Get out there. Get your yellow flags flying. Akash Deep says, excellent podcast today, thank you. Covering the Sikh genocide. Now, your comment talks about communism. And again, unfortunately, we don't have the time to discuss this at length. But yeah, watch my podcast about the Indian constitution and its communist fundamental. It's so infiltrated. It's got communism ingrained in the constitution. Don't believe me? Watch those podcasts. It's shocking. The average Indian has absolutely no idea how deeply ingrained communism is in their constitution. And Indira Gandhi and their links to communist Soviet Union at that time, it's ingrained, it's embedded. It goes all the way back to partition. India almost became a fully communist state. It is subtly communist, and communism is a deeply, deeply evil thing, as your points out. Stalinism. You only need to look at the history of communism. Millions, tens of millions have died under communism, under Stalinism, etc., etc. Again, James, I think all we need to say is just look at communist history to understand the murder, the genocides that occur under communism.
Absolutely, and it's something that I've really learned over the last several years in working with you and the station, and just learning a lot more about India's history and, the involvement potentially that Russia played in the development of that constitution.
Yeah, it's shocking. And again, I would say to those who haven't watched the podcast about the Constitution, some of them are a bit dry, are a bit difficult, because literally we're going through the Constitution line by line. Yeah. But ultimately, just take it as read. The Indian Constitution was effectively drafted by communist sympathisers. It's as simple as that. Shocking. TC, thank you. Sat Sri Akal to you and Sat Sri Akal to Mr. Binder. This act of aggression, the storming of the Golden Temple, was, as you points out, it was a deliberate act to cause maximum pain to the Sikh community, pure evil arrogance. And Mr. Binder mentions the most heinous act, however, was already prophesied and is written in the Holy Scriptures. I didn't know that, actually. Raj Craig Khalsa again comes up. I didn't actually realise it was prophesied. I'm interested to know more about that. But actually, the most heinous act wasn't Blue Star. It was almost Shanti, Operation Shanti. Again, do watch my podcast about Operation Shanti. You think Blue Star was bad? Shanti was part of this. And again, going back to what Bhajan Singh Binder's podcast is about, Operation Shanti was just part of this bigger operation to assassinate President Zia of Pakistan, which again was not just an excuse to allow the Soviet Union to move through towards India. It also allowed the one obstacle in its way, the Sikh community, to be murdered, to be massacred, to be genocided in one massive operation by India. That was Operation Shanti. Again, that was the real evil operation. You think Blue Star was bad. If Shanti had been allowed to happen and the assassins of Indira Gandhi prevented it, Operation Shanti was the real heinous act. And then Azad Singh talks again about Blue Star. So your actually angle on Blue Star was saying, look, and this comes back to again what was brought up in the podcast. You're saying that after Blue Star, you were saying that shown on TV within the complex, the WIC complex, and its entrance, it was discovered there were people inside the complex who were interested in Khalistan even before Blue Star. So we said, rightly so, Bindranvali was not out overtly pro-Khalistan. He was not there campaigning for Khalistan. He was campaigning primarily just for basic human rights of the Sikh community. He was, of course, a sympathiser of the whole concept, but he was not essentially primarily there for Khalistan. But the Khalistan movement does have its roots historically, all the way back to partition, and actually probably before. Yeah. But Blue Star wasn't about that, and Bhindranwale's presence there was not about Khalistan. It was about other things. Again, don't have time to go into that. But what, as a result of Operation Blue Star, as a result of all these things around that time, that really nurtured. It didn't give birth to the Khalistan movement, but ironically, it actually nurtured and really grew. That was the catalyst that really exploded the Khalistan movement, James, because, of course, the genocides that occurred were so dreadful. Unsurprisingly, it nurtured the Khalistan movement. All the Sikh community just said, look, why are we putting up with this? We need our own homeland. Unsurprisingly, really.
Well, and I think that it also drew a lot of international outrage and attention towards how the minorities were being treated, in particular, the Sikh community, and why it is so essential that they be afforded the right to have their own nation.
Indeed, absolutely. And the final page of comments really focuses on this. Hat B says, look, the more you look into the facts and you see the bravery and the courage of the Sikhs, and of course the brutality and the cowardice of Indian governments, as you point out, the community has been massively wronged since 1947. And Shahida Begum says, look, we've been cheated since 1947. The only justice that can come about is an independent Khalistan. It must be made a reality. And Muhammad Yaqub, who I assume is a Muslim, again, presumptuous, but I think from your comment, I assume you're a Muslim, maybe living in J&K. Or maybe you've escaped J&K because of the oppression. Are you British or American? Well, actually, I'm British. James is Canadian, to answer your question there. Tell me, this is an interesting comment, and it's almost a plea. When will Khalistan happen? I want to see a strong Sikh nation called Khalistan. What about Kashmir? Will Kashmir ever get freedom from India? I want Khalistan. You clearly want a free Kashmir as well. When do you think Khalistan and Kashmir will be free? This is a real plea from the heart. I would say to you, Muhammad Yaqub, keep the faith, keep confident, keep strong. It's happening. Watch our show regularly. I only need to refer to what I talked about earlier in my stories there. The movement now is happening. It's been very clever about it's happening. The militancy back in the 80s and the 90s was a self-defensive movement. It was militant because it had no choice. But it came to an inevitable end because the might of India stamped down on it brutally. It was just sheer brute massacres that stopped it. So this time it's happening a lot more cleverly, a lot more shrewdly, a lot more intelligently. They're doing it peacefully, they're doing it democratically, they are targeting the right bodies to make it happen. Khalistan is going to happen. It's going to happen sooner than you realise. Once Khalistan happens, to answer your question about Kashmir, J&K, of course, when Khalistan happens, it's going to make all these other states, and you refer to 5 other potential regions that will demand for independence. It's these dominoes. Once Khalistan happens, it's very likely that J&K will stand up and say, look, we want the same. We have exactly the same legal basis as Khalistan, so it's likely that J&K will happen. And then, of course, all the other areas, whether it's Manipur, whether it's Tamil Nadu, or wherever. So I would say to you, Muhammad Yaqub, keep the faith. It is going to happen. All the pieces are falling into place. All these pieces of that jigsaw are falling into place. The right stepping stones, all those pieces are being put very cleverly into the right places by organisations like the Sikh Federation International. They know what's needed. They have looked ahead. They've worked out the legal requirements to establish Khalistan, and they are doing it one by one. And here's the thing, there is nothing that India can do about it. The dice are already rolled. The future is already set. That future is Khalistan, James. We know for a fact that it is legally justified. It is morally justified. It is justified on every level. That is why, Muhammad Yaqub, it is going to happen. So keep the faith. That's my message, James.
Absolutely. And don't forget that you will see it here on our program when Khalistan happens, because we will be broadcasting live from there.
Indeed we will. So all I would say to those who doubt it, don't lose the faith. Have confidence. Stay the course. It is going to happen. Right. Don't lose hope. It's on its way, and all of us together, the might of all of us joining together is going to push it over the line. So, and as James says, we look forward to broadcasting from that first day of independent Khalistan. But unfortunately, we are well over time as always, so we must draw the show to a close for another day. But thank you so much for watching. Thank you for watching Perspectives. Don't forget to keep those comments coming in. Loads of comments that we'll hope to cover over the next few days as well. And so do keep them coming. Thanks for all those. Don't forget you can message us directly at message@satellitetv.com if there's anything you'd like to message us directly, which many of you had done, so thank you for those. But in the meantime, it is a goodbye from me and it is a goodbye from James.
Stay safe, everyone.
Thanks so much for watching Perspectives for another day. We will see you another time. Cheers.